Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from newcoder.com, and in this tutorial we are going to be talking about variables and comments. So a variable is just a way of storing data. You can think of it as a container that can be used as many times as you want. So let's build upon a little from the previous video, and let's say that I have this really long number. So I have no idea how long it is, doesn't matter. And let's say that I want to add a bunch of numbers to this number. So let's say I have a print. We want to add this against 10. We can make a bunch of copies and we'll say 20, 30. So let's go ahead and save this and let's go ahead and execute this. So I have this as tutorial 3 and you see that we get the following output. But wouldn't it be great if I could store this really big number within a variable and then reuse that variable as many times as I want, instead of just copying and pasting this over and over again? So let's say that I can say something like num, and I could assign it. This is called the assignment operator. And I want to assign it the value of this. So let me just copy that, paste that here. So now num has the value of this. From here, what I can do is reuse num as many times as I want. So what I could do is replace this num plus 10, num plus 20, num plus 30. So I'm using the variable instead. So now I could save this. And now if I come down here and press the up arrow on my keyboard, it should bring up the previous command that we typed in within our command prompt. So now let's go ahead and hit enter, and you can see that we get the same exact output. Now once you assign a value to a variable, you could reassign it to another value. So let's say I don't want num to be this very big number. I can then change it to say num is going to be assigned a value of 10, for example. We'll make it smaller, and then we could just copy this and see what we get. So we go ahead and save this, and there you go. So we got 10 plus 10 is equal to 20, 10 plus 20 is equal to 30, 10 plus 30 is equal to 40. So you can see that we could assign a value to this variable. We could reuse it as many times as we want. And we could also reassign the value whenever we feel like it. Now from here, let's talk about how Python is a dynamically typed language. So what is a dynamically typed language? So for example, this variable is storing a value which is of type int. And it continues even though it's reassigned to store a value of type int. But I could store a float within this num variable. So for example, let's get rid of these print statements. I could say num is equal to 1.2. Now in older languages, statically typed languages like C++, C#, Java, you have to declare the type that a variable can hold. Within Python, it doesn't matter. 1 minute I could hold an int, 1 minute I could hold a float. So if I was just to print out num, it will work perfectly fine. So we get 1.2. But I could also go to the extreme lengths. So you could say that these two are numbers, even though they're different types. I can make a num hold a string. So if you remember in the first video, the first tutorial, that we did hello world, and we put it between these quotations, this is a string, and I'm storing this string within this variable called num. And now if I print this out, you can see if I save, execute, that we get hello world. So Python is a dynamically typed language. You can store whatever data types you want within that language. You are not bounded to a certain type once you declare it. All right, so from here, let's talk about how we could declare multiple variables and assign them data at the same time. So let's have a clear slate for a second. Delete that. And what I can do is I could have num1 equal to 1, and I could have num2 equal to 2, for example. So I have two different variables, one called num1, which has the value of 1, one called num2, which has the value of 2. And if I was to print this out, we should already know the result. So if I save this, go ahead and execute, we get 1 and 2 respectively. So instead of doing this on 2 lines, I could combine this into 1. So what I'm going to do is comment this out, and a comment is not considered code. So if I hit Control /, you can see how our editor has this marked green and we have these pound signs. So now Python will actually ignore this and just execute this code. Now this is going to give us an error because num1 and num2 isn't declared anymore. So this isn't considered code anymore. So if I was to rerun this, execute this, you see num1 is not defined. And that's because this is not considered code anymore. Now a comment, just to go over this quickly, is just used to describe the code. I just comment this out because I just want to show you how to declare multiple variables and assign them values. So I don't want this considered to be code anymore. So I could just say num1, comma, num2. So I have these two variables and I could assign it 1, comma 2. So this is equivalent to this. So now if I save this, execute this, you can see that we get the same exact response. So this is how to declare multiple variables at once and assign them values. Next, you could also, if you want, let's just add these two numbers together. So I could say num1 plus num2, go ahead and print this out, is 3. So you can add different variables together and it acts regularly. So this would be the same if I was to do 1 plus 2. And this would work if this was division, multiplication, any of those mathematical operators. It will work just the same. You could also assign variables to other variables. So let's say that I'll comment this out as well. Actually, let's leave this commented out and let's uncomment this. So we have num1 is equal to 1, num2 equal to 2. But now what I could do is I can assign num1 to whatever num2 is holding. So now if I was to print this out, num1, go ahead and execute this, and you can see that num1 now has the value of 2. So you can have variables assigned to whatever value that another variable is holding. So now let's talk about naming conventions. So let's give a new example. So let's say that I want to store my name, for example. So I'll say first name is equal to Pedro, and we'll do last name as well. Now, this will work and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, but there are naming conventions that we should follow. So having everything lowercase is pretty hard to read, especially when you have tons of lines of code. So right now, this might not seem like it's difficult to read at all, but if you can imagine having hundreds of lines of code, this is very difficult to read. So there are naming conventions, and a convention is typically best practices that you could do. This is not specifically enforced by the programming language, so Python doesn't care if you name it first name. So the two conventions I want to show you is, one of them is called camel case. So camel case, you start the first word with lowercase and the second word with uppercase. So if we were to use camel case styling, we would have first name like this, and last name, once again, lowercase. The second word within the variable name, we do uppercase. So first word within the variable name, you should lowercase, you keep alternating. So the second word would be uppercase, and if there was a third word, you would lowercase once again. this is considered camel casing. Now what we can do is introduce ourselves to the second convention, and this is called snake case. So what snake case is instead of capitalizing and lowercasing every other word, is we add an underscore between each word. So this is snake case, and we have first name. So we have first underscore name, last underscore name. So this is camel casing, this is snake casing. So if you have a variable with multiple words, you just add an underscore between the words. Now, there are a lot more naming conventions for different things, but we'll go over them when we get to them. But if you're just declaring a variable to store data in, you would use camel casing or snake casing. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about before I let you guys leave is let us talk about the rules. Now, these rules are rules that Python enforces. So you'll actually get an error if you don't follow these rules. So I only need one of these, for example. So I'll just leave these two. And the first rule is every variable must start with a letter or underscore. So right now, first name is good. And I can also do underscore first name. So if I was to execute this, you see that we get no errors. So every variable must start with a letter or underscore. Now, if I was to change this, and let's say I want to start with a number, so we'll start with 100. You can see Visual Studio Code is giving me a hint that this is not allowed. But let's go ahead and save. And let's go ahead and run this. You can see we get invalid syntax. So it's complaining, hey, this is an invalid variable. So a variable must start with a letter or underscore. The next rule is that the rest of the variable's name must only contain a letter, number, or underscore. So for example, I could do something like this, totally fine. I could also add numbers to my variable name, also fine. So if I save this, run it, no problem. So what can't it be? Well, let's say, for example, you can't have like an operator here, right? Remember, plus is adding two numbers. So you can't use the addition operator. So if I was to save this, try to execute this, again, invalid syntax. And that's because it thinks that I'm trying to add something. Can't use an @ sign. Go ahead and execute this. See, same problem. So as long as you stick to a letter, number, or underscore, you should be perfectly fine. And the last thing I want to mention is that variables are case sensitive. So what does that mean? So if I get rid of that, let's say I have first name like so, but I also create first name like so. And we'll make this Peter instead of Pedro. So now let's go ahead and print this out. Go ahead and save, and we could go ahead and run this. So you can see the first printout gives us Pedro, second printout equals Peter. So why did I show you this? Is that variables are case sensitive. So first name does not equal first name with a capital N. So these are considered two different variables. So that is pretty much all I wanted to cover within this tutorial. And I'll see you guys in the next one.